There is another kind of a plan that's called a prepaid tuition plan. And essentially how these plans work is you buy credits at today's rate and then you use them later. There are quite a few complications, I guess is the best word with this. And I think for me personally, there is just there's a question that I need to ask. Do you want to trust the state to invest your money properly and keep their promise that when your child gets to college, their credits are paid for? And what I can tell you is that over the recent economic times, there are states who have defaulted on these promises. Not that you don't get the credits, you do get credits, but you don't get the full credit. So they might say, hey, look, we really screwed up the investment thing, so instead of getting 3 credits for free, it's actually going to cost you, $150 or $50 a credit. So they're going to charge you something extra because they didn't save properly in those accounts. The book refers to some drawbacks. Obviously, we need a long time to derive benefits. That's just a time value fact of life. You need to have compounding, right? This is actually, in the end, when the child starts to do this, it's going to be treated as their income. So it could hurt some of their chances of receiving financial aid. Again, it's very little income for most students, so it's not going to be that terrible. Now, your book does say that it provides limited investment choices and little flexibility. I'm not really sure where they got that information. The programs for our 2 states are Kentucky uses the sponsor of TIA CREF, and Ohio uses Putnam. Now, you don't have to use those companies. You can use any company you want from any state. Each state has sponsors, but you can use any of them. You don't have to necessarily use the one in your state. And I'm not saying that Kentucky's or Ohio's plans are bad, but not all states necessarily have good plans. So you may want to go to another state that has more choices, has more flexibility. And again, just like with the Coverdell plan, if you take your money out and you don't use it for education, besides taxation, there will now be a 10% penalty tacked on to those distributions. Anyway, we're not going to go through this. Always says that where are the best places to put your money. I mean, you can look through this table. I mean, quite frankly, my thoughts are a 529 plan is probably the best plan, mostly because of the flexibility that it gives you. It's very similar to the Coverdell account. The only difference between 529 and Coverdell is the amount that you can invest, and in a 529 plan you can only invest in higher education. So you can't use 529 money for elementary schools like a parochial school or a parochial high school. You can't use it for that kind of thing. But anything after high school, it's eligible that you can use it for that. With those 2 exceptions, there's really not that much difference between the Coverdell and the 529 plan. So what kind of strategies do we need? I mean, obviously we need to find a strategy that's going to maximize returns within a certain risk preference. We'll talk about risk preferences a little bit when we get into the investment chapters a little bit later. But we need to try to diversify our holdings across stocks, bonds, money market securities, and we have to try to match the time horizon between the assets and the liabilities. We need to have them to be in sync so that when the liability comes due, the assets are available to be paid. What kind of strategies can we ultimately use? I mean, it kind of depends on your age, right? If the kid is between up to 9 years old, we want to use a majority of stocks. But as they get older, we may want to move our money into more, less risky types of investments. And this is a typical strategy that a person uses with retirement. The closer and closer you get, the more you want to move your money to less risky alternatives. Now the challenge obviously is once you move them to these less risky alternatives, you're also going to be getting a much lower rate of return. So we have to be a little bit concerned with that. There are other instruments that you can use, and your textbook talks about a lot of them. The challenges with these are usually taxation. Almost without a doubt, it's the rate of return that you can earn on these types of investments, but in general they are less attractive to current middle income families than what they used to be. But of course you can read about that in the text about these varying alternative measures, if you will, of saving money specifically for college. So how much does a person need? Well, we need to know what the cost of attendance is, and then we need to have some calculation on what the family expects to contribute. For a lot of middle income families, unfortunately, the expected family contribution is very low. So that's something that as planners, as people who are planning for our kids' college education, we want to try to get that number as big as possible, right? What we can contribute without harming our own personal cash flows, our own personal investment strategies for retirement, etc. College education planning is something that's extra. Right? Kids will find a way to go to college. If they have to borrow, that's just what they have to do. They have to borrow. It's nice if we can contribute and lower those amounts in some way. The current federal direct student loan program, all right, the fees have been drastically reduced. They've actually taken this process away from banks and have placed it in the hands of the government. So we have less money is going towards the administration of the programs than in the past. You can obviously get worksheets to figure out how much you can contribute, etc. Again, I don't want to get into all of those details right now, but obviously there are aspects of planning that you can do that are, you can find that information. You can work things out in paper. There's other ways, obviously. You can get grants and scholarships, right? Parents need to encourage students to study in high school so they can get grades that will contribute to their ability to get scholarships as they move on. Student loans are obviously are possible. Work-study programs can help them to defer some of the funds a little bit later on. But as you can see from this graph, right? I mean, 39% of the money, that goes into of sources comes from federal loans. The rest of the remaining pieces here is actually a very small pieces. There are state grants available. There's some federal tax credits and deductions that you can take. Maybe your employer could give you a grant, right? Pell Grants, those types of things. There's a lot of sources for financing a college education, and it behooves parents and students to start this process early. Start thinking about scholarships and the loans and grants, etc. when a person's like in their junior year. Don't wait till you're a senior to start doing this planning. And of course, you have to pay back student loans. What happens when students can't pay things back? Well, there are 4 basic ways that you can get your debt payments or your student loan paid for that might make it easier for you to do it over the long haul. Deferment just means that there's some something right now that you are just going to put off paying the loan for a period of time, and interest does not accrue. So essentially what that means is if you have an undergraduate student loan and you go to graduate school, your undergraduate student loan is deferred. It's not going to gather interest until you graduate from the graduate program, and then those things will all be trigger 6 months after you graduate. Forbearance means that there is something that you just can't make the payments. Your income is bad, maybe you're disabled and you can't make payments, etc. This is actually where you're going to get something written off from the loans. Of course, we can also set up graduated payments where the payments start smaller and they grow over time. You can consolidate loans together. So instead of making 4 loan payments, you'd only have to make 1. All those things can make the payment of student loans a little bit easier. There are some other things that are available to us. Employers can provide education assistance. Currently, that's a maximum of $5,250. Student loan interest is sometimes deferrable. Higher education expenses can actually be written off through our itemized deductions. Some of these things come and go in the tax code, but just to know that there from time to time there's availability of that. There's the American Opportunity Credit. This started actually quite a while ago. It's referred to as the Hope Scholarship. That obviously, I think that refers to the first 2 years of college. The Life Learning Credit kicks in after that for junior, senior, and etc. As you go through the education process. And again, I also mentioned a little while ago that there is a standard itemized deduction. Obviously, it's the amount that's greater than 2% of your AGI, but you can include that in your itemized deductions. And again, this is a very quick and dirty kind of explanation of the basic tools. As you read through the text, you can get more detail about the amounts of money that's available, some of the different programs that we didn't really talk about here. But it is a topic that most parents certainly are interested in. So I will see you in class.